Welcome to your Guilds of Ravnica set review with Sean for MTG Deck Tech. We're going to break apart the Guilds of Ravnica set into different guilds, starting with Boros and working our way all the way through to Dimir. And we're going to close on a set review with the artifacts, lands, and then we're going to actually have a section where we look at the overall ranking of each guild and the rarity of the removal spells in the guild. This review is going to be focused on the limited aspect, so we're going to look at your pre-releases and your sealed events, while I might still occasionally mention some standard applications. Our grading scale that we'll cover in every video is the typical A to F rankings. Our A equals bombs that we must run and actively pull us towards a color. The B are the high level removal spells and the tilting cards that lead you towards that color and make you feel really confident in your pool the more Bs you see. Cs are the cards that make up the bulk of your deck. If your deck is mostly Cs, it's probably a pretty decent deck, because these are your cards that aren't amazing. They're not going to win you the game alone, but they make your deck feel consistent. Whereas Ds are the bad versions of your Cs. So these are the cards that are less impactful, have less meaningful text, more situational, and weaker overall. When your deck has more Ds than it has Cs, it typically means you're not going to have as consistent of a win rate. And finally, we have our Fs. Our Fs are going to be two parts. It's going to be cards you don't want to run at all, really narrow cards, or it's going to be your sideboard slots. Anything that's a build around is either an F if it's terrible, even if you succeed in building around it, or if it's something that has a really good payoff, but it takes a very specific deck, it could be labeled as a D. If it's a build around, but it's labeled as a D, that means it can be really good if you can make the deck work. So we're going to go and dive into Boros, and we're going to look through every guild individually. Some cards with a lot of text, such as our rares and mythics, we might talk a little bit more on. Some of the other cards, such as your Ds, it's going to be a really quick acknowledgement of what it does. So to start, we're going to start with the leader of the guild. We're going to try to start with the effect of each guild every time we talk about one. So we have Aurelia, the Exemplar of Justice. So the first effect that you see on there is it has Mentor. Mentor is the mechanic for Boros, and what Mentor says is whenever this creature attacks, you can put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature with less power. So I'm not a huge fan of the Mentor mechanic overall. As we'll see as we look through it, a lot of our Mentor cards have really weak toughnesses, so they attack, they give a 1/1 counter, and then they die to a lower costed card. They also have the drawback of the mentoring only happening based on power. So you now need to have a weaker creature that you give a 1/1 counter to. So really, do we want to lose our more expensive cards to power up our weaker cards? And they both have to be attacking. So that means that after a certain turn, Limited has a lot of board stalls. So now your mechanic's actually doing nothing, because you can't really attack because you run the risk of losing both, even if you do put a 1/1 counter on the smaller creature. So your mentor cards that have flying are notably better, such as Aurelia, but most of them are subpar. In the case of Aurelia, though, you're not running her for the mentor. Her effect is amazing as is. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you can choose up to one target creature you control. Until the end of turn, that creature gets +2/+0, no matter what it is. But if it has red, it gets trample. If it's white, it gets vigilance. So she can also target herself, meaning that she gets to attack as a 4/5 trample and vigilance, and then block as a 2/5. So I think she's pretty strong as far as a mythic, and she's going to take over a lot of games, especially with her flying. The mentor ability is a great bonus, especially if you get another flyer, but she would be great even without the mentor ability. I gave her an A-. She doesn't have the exact text that will take over a board state when you're behind, but if you're at parity or you're ahead, she's really going to help you pressure that win. So if you see her in your pool, you are pulled towards red-white, but as we'll see, it might not be one of the stronger color pairs. Next, we have Chance for Glory. Chance for Glory is a card that I do not see playing in Limited, and I also don't see much constructed playability. It's a 3-mana instant. Creatures you control gain indestructible until the end of turn, and then you take an extra turn after this one. At the beginning of that turn's instep, you lose the game. So anytime a card says you lose the game, you really have to be careful. And in this effect, in Constructed, I don't see it having a lot of play, because if your opponents have Settle or Fog or a lot of blockers, it's going to be really hard to leverage this into a win, especially because the board wipe right now doesn't destroy your creatures anyway. And in Limited, you're rarely in a board position where taking 2 turns is going to let you win the game. So this card's normally going to be a card that you have to do a lot of work to actually get an effect out of, but you risk losing the game if they have any responses. So for that reason, I give it a flat F. I wouldn't play it in Limited at all. Tajik Legion's Edge, I'm not sure if I'm saying the name right, is our legendary creature, Human Soldier. It's a 3/2. He has Haste and Mentor. This is another pretty decent Mentor creature because of the Haste effect. He can come in and immediately make another Grizzly Bear into a 3/3. And he has an additional text that says you prevent all non-combat damage that would be dealt to other creatures you control. So he can take non-combat damage, but other creatures can't. The drawback with Legion is a lot of our Legion creatures, they have, or the Mentor creatures have lower toughness than they have power. But with this card, he actually has the ability to give himself first strike. So if you have a pump spell, or if anybody tries to block with a Grizzly Bear, a 2/2, you're actually able to give it first strike so they can't remove it. So they have to do a little more work to get this more Mentor creature off the battlefield. The Mentor mechanic is going to be interesting, and it's going to be important to remember later. There is a fair number of spells that are instant speed, and they give plus number to pump a creature. But because of the Mentor effect, if you're going to attack multiple creatures, you actually want to play those like they're sorceries. So this way you can pump other creatures. If you wait and try to do it in response, you'll have already missed your Mentor trigger. But for Tajik, we're going to give him a B+. Our Legion Guild Mage, we get Guild Mages again. These Guild Mages tap for their effect, so it's not like previous Guild Mages where you can sometimes have them activate multiple times in a turn. These will tap to activate. They're 2 mana, 2/2 Grizzly Bears, which Grizzly Bears are really important in every limited format. I always consider those in the C range if they're true 2/2s, and then higher if they have upside. These Guild Mages do have upside, but some of them cost a lot. So the Legion Guild Mage is 6 mana to tap it and deal 3 damage to each opponent. That's a good way to grind through a board stall if you both have intimidating board positions, to slowly deal 3 to them over and over again. But it also has a Jailer effect with 2 and a white, tap another target creature. So this will allow you to tap a creature on their instep, a tap creature on your turn, and attack through. Or if they have one big attacker that's pressuring you, instead of having to chump block, you just use this to tap their creature that's pressuring you, typically out of the green colors. I gave this card a B- because I think the tap effect, plus the ability to win the long game, actually makes it deceptively one of the better Guild Mages. It's not my favorite one, but it's probably my second favorite, and I think it just has a lot of ways to win the game at parity, stabilize if you're behind, and it can in some ways push if you're in the lead, but that's not its strongest suit. We do have back the form of split cards. We can't fuse them, and it's not Aftermath, so you just choose which one you're playing. The first one we have Response, Resurgence. This card is a removal spell for the Boros deck, but it has to be, again, it's situational. So Response lets you deal 5 damage to your attacking or blocking creature. And Resurgence is 5 mana. Creatures you control gain first strike and vigilance until the end of turn. After this main phase, there's an additional combat phase followed by an additional main phase. So this allows you to attack twice, give your creatures first strike, and give them vigilance. So you'll also be able to block if you do this as your first main phase effect. I think the card's amazing. I think this card's actually really strong. I gave it a B. Response, typically the things that punish for attacking and blocking is a little bit stronger and limited. It's not great because your opponents can still just choose not to attack. But then you have the backside of Resurgence, which is if you ever have a more superior board state, if your creatures match up really well and they don't have great blocks, now you can really punish them by attacking twice, giving first strike, and they have vigilance, so they're able to block on any crackbacks. True Fire Captain is our new Boros Reckoner. This is double red, double white, so all the guilds have a card that have 2 of one color and 2 of another color, so they're a little bit hard to cast. And this is a human knight with Mentor. It's a 4/3, so if you notice, again, a lot of our Mentor creatures have bigger power than they have toughness. When True Fire Captain is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to target player. So similar to Boros Reckoner, if I attack with my 4/3 and they block with a 5/5, I get to deal 5 to my opponent because it took 5 damage. So it's a good way to kind of get some extra damage through. If they do block it, the Mentor effect, it is going to be able to Mentor a 3/3 or a 2/2. So that's pretty decent. The only thing I would say to be wary of in these guild decks is, even though you're typically going to be in 2 colors, double of each color can still be really difficult to do. We do have guild gates in our basic land slot, and we have guild gates in our packs, but it's still going to be really hard to, on turn 4, have double red, double white. A lot of times you're going to have 3 of one and 1 of the other. So I wouldn't count on playing this on turn 4. You normally count on turn 5 or so. Sometimes it'll be turn 4, sometimes it'll be turn 6 or 7. It really depends on how your draws go and if you built your mana base correctly. This card I will give a B. It's just because the effect you're getting out of it is really strong. It's not one that's going to win the game on its own, but it has the ability to pump another creature, trade with a pretty decent sized creature, and it has the ability to really kind of pressure your opponent on what kind of blocks they give it. So I think the card overall is really strong. Again, it's going to really depend on how the mana flow works and how aggressive the format is, even though the format does seem fairly slow. We have Boros Locket. We have a locket for every guild. The rankings I gave the lockets aren't going to match across the guilds. For the Boros, I gave it a B-. I think the lockets are going to be great. I think you're going to play them in whatever deck you're in, at least 1 or 2. because the games are going to go longer, so you want to make sure you can play your bigger spells. The Boros Locket's a 3-mana artifact that taps for a red or a white, and you can pay 4 hybrid mana of all your colors to sacrifice it to draw 2 cards. There's not a lot of colors mana, so if you're in a 2-color deck, you should be able to sacrifice this because you can pay 4 white, 4 red, 2 of each, 3 of one, 1 of the other. You have all these combinations. And so it's going to be able to, in the late game, replace itself for 2 cards or to tap for mana. I think the Boros Locket's one of the weaker lockets only because we really don't have a lot in the way of mana sinks or high converted mana costs in our Boros decks. So we don't really need the extra mana as much. Our next split card is Integrity and Intervention. This card I was a little torn on to begin with. So we had War Leader's Helix previously. It was a 4-mana instant, deal 3, you gain 3 life. And we've had 1 2-mana, target creature gets +2/+2 effects. Originally, I'd given this card a C or a C-, but I think it's a C+ on the sheer fact that you can spend either color mana to give your creature +2/+2, but you also have the option of making a 4-mana damage spell, and it gains you a little bit of life. I don't think the card's amazing, but I think you'll run it in your deck, and I think it'll be a pretty good option if you're looking for that extra little bit of removal. Deafening Clarion is a card that you're going to want to keep in mind as you're building your deck if you open these. I think you're going to run it. I gave it a C+. This card is deal 3 damage to each creature, or creatures you control gain lifelink until the end of turn. So you have the option, if you have a wide board state and you're not really behind, to give your creatures lifelink and have a major swing that swings the life totals. Or if you're behind and you know that you have this card in your hand, you can sandbag a little bit and possibly blow up another opponent's board state if they have a lot of small tokens or Boros matchups. Legion Warboss is a card that I expect to make a heavy standard impact. It's been compared to Goblin Rabble Master, and I think it's very similar. It doesn't hit itself as hard as Goblin Rabble Master, but the army of 1/1s eventually do cause a lot of pressure for your opponent. So it's 2 and a red. It's a 2/2 Goblin Soldier. It has Mentor, which as a 2-powered creature, the Mentor effect really isn't that important. You're not mentoring very many things. It has the ability to make another Goblin token a 2/2 as well. The bigger part is it doesn't force other Goblins to swing. So when it makes the token, that token does attack this turn of Fable. But if it survives that attack, it doesn't have to keep attacking. Only the new Goblin has to attack this turn of Fable. So you're able to play the Legion Warboss, get a 1/1, attack for 1, and then slowly squeeze out 1/1s. And that can eventually cause an ability to swing the board, especially if you're running pump spells, because now your 1/1 might actually be able to eat a Grizzly Bear in exchange for a pump spell. So your opponents have to block if you have mana open according to what spells you might be able to cast in response. I gave Legion Warboss a B. I think it's going to be a heavy constructed standard impact card, and I think it's going to be very noticeable as far as the impact in limited is. Light of the Legion is a 6-mana flying 5/5 angel. It has Mentor. Now this is a creature that can Mentor a lot because it has a high toughness, so it's not easy to kill in combat, and 5 power is a pretty large creature, so it's able to Mentor 2/2s and 3/3s and 4/4s. When it dies, you put a +1/+1 counter on each white creature you control. So it's not every creature. But for 6 mana for a 5/5 flyer, that's going to close games fairly quickly. And that Mentor effect's pretty strong. I gave the card a B. It might be worth even a higher ranking, but it's a good top end to your aggressive Boros list. Swiftblade Vindicator is a card I wasn't really sure where to stand on it. I don't think it's going to be very impactful in standard unless you're really building around it, because it's a 2-mana 1/1 with Double Strike, Vigilance, and Trample. Those are some great keywords, but you have to find ways to pump it. Now, on Limited, you're going to have a lot of Mentor creatures, and every Mentor creature can Mentor onto this Swiftblade Vindicator. You also have your pump spells. So this card, if you Mentor it once, now has a 2/2 Vigilance, Double Strike, Trample. So I think this card's a card you're going to run in your Boros lists almost every time. I just don't know how much of a standard impact it's going to have. I give it a C+. It's not blowing me away, but it has the ability to slowly pressure your opponent out of the game because the double strike instead of just first strike is pretty large. Boros Challenger is our next card. It's another 2-mana, but this one's a 2-mana 2/3, so it actually wins the Grizzly Bear battle. Has a Mentor effect, and for 4 mana you can give it +1/+1 until the end of turn. So you have a little bit of a mana sink. If you have a 2/2 creature, you can make this a 3/4, attack with this in your 2/2 and turn that into a 3/3. It gives you a lot of extra damage options. And a 2-mana 2/3 is just a really solid blocker if you have to get on your back foot. So for a red and a white, as long as your mana base is built pretty well, I think this card's a pretty easy run. I give it a C+, just because I do think it's going to have a lot of impact on the early game. Goblin Banneret is a 1-mana 1/1 with Mentor. Now, why would you want to run a 1/1 with Mentor? It's because you have one in a red. It gets +2/+0 until the end of turn. So now it can start mentoring two power creatures. But you also have the ability to activate that multiple times. I gave Goblin Banneret a D because I really don't want to be spending mana and throwing away a card just to put out 1 or 2 1/1 counters on a creature over time. So I'm not a huge fan of this card. I could see it making impacts, but I don't think the format's going to be fast enough. Maybe in draft, but definitely not in limited. Justice Strike is probably one of the better removal spells in Boros. This is target creature instant. It's an instant for a target creature, deals damage to itself equal to its power. So if I have a 5/5, it takes 5 damage, it dies. If I have a 4/3, it takes 4 damage and it dies. So this is going to kill a lot of creatures in the format. We don't have a whole lot of creatures where the toughness is larger than the power. So this is an effective removal spell for most cards. I give this card a B-, just because there are some occasional cards where it doesn't work on. But I think the card itself is probably one of the better removal spells, and it could end up being almost in the A range as far as efficiency, depending on how often the spider-style cards with a higher toughness get played. Sunhome Stalwart is a 2-mana 2/2 with First Strike and Mentor. And again, this is a situation where I'm not sure how often it's mentoring. What you really want to do is stack your Mentor effects. So it'd be ideal if you can mentor this card, turning him into a 3/3, and then use this card to mentor a 2/2, turning that one into a 3/3. So you're just really trying to pass it down. It's a good flavor point, but the fact it can't mentor based off of differences in toughness make it kind of hard to push through. I think this card is an automatic run in any Boros list, though, because it is a 2-mana Grizzly Bear that wins the Grizzly Bear fights with its First Strike, and it will eventually start pumping other things. Swath Cutter Giant is a 6-mana 5/5 with Vigilance, and limited Vigilance is a whole lot more impactful than it is in Constructed. And when it attacks, it deals 1 damage to each creature defending player controls. There's a lot of X1s, especially in our tokens, that make this effect really strong. I think the card's a C+, because I'm not in love with a 6-mana 5/5, even if it does have Vigilance. But the 1 damage to each creature defending player controls, this card can end up being a B, and it can end up falling down to a D. It depends on your matchup. But I think 6 mana for a 5/5 Vigilance is playable. You will likely play it, but there will be some matches where it might be a card you take out if you need to bring in a hate card. Barging Sergeant is a 5-mana 4/2 with Haste, which is not very exciting on its own, and also has Mentor. If you can get your opponent to where they have no blockers, they attacked you, or they didn't play a creature, this card can be great because it can Mentor a 3/3, so now you're hitting them for 8. And it has the Haste, but the problem I have with it is it gets blocked by 2/1/1 tokens or by a Grizzly Bear too easily for me to really feel comfortable investing 5 mana into it, unless my opponent's tapped out with no creatures. So I give it a D+ because it can have good impacts, but this is not one I want to see in the deck. It's just really situational. You will probably lose to it at some point during your pre-release. I still don't think it's one you want in your deck actively. Blade Instructor is a 3-mana 3/1 with Mentor. This is not a card I have any interest in playing. I love the art of the card. I think it looks really great, but it gets traded by any 1/1 token. It gets eaten by any Grizzly Bear. And so really the Mentor of making a 2/2 or a 1/1 into 1 extra power isn't worth it for me to be playing a 3-mana that dies to basically everything. I give it a D. It's possibly even a D-. It's not one you really want to run. You might have to if you're short on 3 drops, but you have no interest in really putting this in your deck. Fresh-Faced Recruit is a 2-mana 2/1, and it's got hybrid mana. And that means you can actually splash this in like a Selesnya list, but it's very much built for Boros. As long as it's your turn, it has First Strike. So even though it's a 2/1, you're wanting to be aggressive in the Boros colors. So if you can Mentor onto this card, now it's a 3/2 that whenever it attacks it has First Strike. Mentor it again, it's a 4/3 that when it attacks it has First Strike. I think it's a build your own threat that will be really effective. Now, if you're on the back foot, if you're at parity, it's not great because you can't really block with this efficiently. It's going to die to anything it blocks. But when you're swinging, it has the potential to really be a threat. I give it a C- just because of the low toughness. But I think the ability to give it First Strike and Mentor, if you are an aggressive list, if the Boros list is more aggressive than it appears on paper, this could be a pretty good run. Garrison Sergeant is a 5-mana 3/3. It has double strike as long as you control a gate. For 5 mana, it's not really something I have a lot of interest in playing. I give it a D. If I really need to fix my curve, I might run it. But I don't really want to be playing a whole lot of gates in my Boros list because I want to be aggressive and I want land untapped. And also 5 mana for a 3/3 double strike isn't terribly impressive in a world full of large green creatures. Hammer Dropper is a 4-mana 5/2 giant soldier, and it has Mentor. That's all it's got. I give this card a C minus. The only reason I give this a C minus, it gets traded with grizzly bears and things like that. But the fact it has 5 power makes it able to mentor some really large flying threats, or makes it able to mentor other 3-powered creatures that also have mentor to continue the chain going. So I think it's an important link in the chain is the way it's designed, but it's not a card I'm excited to play. I'll probably play it because I think it's necessary from a design standpoint to connect all your mentor creatures together. I think this is what keeps that synergy going. I think not running enough of these high power, low toughness mentor creatures can make your deck inconsistent, but it's not something I enjoy playing. Parhelion Patrol is a 4-mana 2/3 with Flying and Vigilance, and it has Mentor. Now this is a card I'm very excited for. As a 4-mana 2/3, the Vigilance makes it able to block really efficiently, and the Mentor effect allows it to pump other flyers or smaller creatures on the ground. I'm mostly looking to find a way to mentor this creature once with a 3 or higher powered Mentor creature, because as a 3/4 Flying and Vigilance for 4 mana, that's a really strong play. So this card makes me want to play some of the weaker mentor creatures just to make this card better. And at common, you will be seeing this on the other side of the table fairly common. I give it a C because you do need to make it a little bit of work to make it as strong as you want. But I think this is going to be a key cornerstone of the Boros list. Sky Knight Legionnaire is a 2/2 flying and haste for 1 red and a white. We've seen this card multiple times before. It's serviceable if you're trying to be aggressive, but it's not incredibly overwhelming either. Let's get a C. It's probably a little bit worse than our previous card, but it's one that you'll run in your list as a curve filler that applies pressure. Wojek Bodyguard is a 3-mana 3/3 with Mentor, which is a really good rate. 3 mana for a Hill Giant is perfectly fine. Mentor is another great effect. The drawback for it is it can't attack or block alone. With that Mentor effect, I really want to attack with a 2-power creature anyway to make another Hill Giant, so that's fine. But it is unfortunate I can't block Grizzly Bears with this one unless I add another creature into the blocking comparison. I give it a C+ because I think it's very efficient for what it does. I think it's going to be a key piece in advancing your Mentor mechanic, so I think it's going to be a strong card in the deck. Bounty Agent is a 2-mana 2/2 with Vigilance. It's a human soldier. You can tap it and sacrifice it to destroy target legendary artifact, creature, or enchantment. We don't have a whole lot of legendary creatures. We have a few, some of the guild leaders, but they're not a ton. And there's no legendary enchantments or artifacts. So this card for me is not incredibly impressive. It's just a 2-mana 2/2 Vigilance. I give this card a C+ because if it does have the ability to kill a guild leader, because guild leaders are just regular rare, that's going to be huge. If your opponent doesn't have a guild leader in the deck, this card's more of a D or D+. But the guild leaders, when they resolve, are going to take over games. So I think this card's pretty important. Citywide Bust is a 3-mana form of a board wipe. Destroy all creatures with a toughness 4 or greater. In limited, this in the Boros deck is going to be strong. I give it a B+ because against the green list, the list that are able to block you really efficiently, they're going to lead back some big creatures that can eat your mentor creatures, and they're going to attack with some other creatures or whatever else chain happens. You play this, you kill all the things that can block profitably, you attack, you get some mentor triggers, and now your opponent's in a really awkward position. For 3 mana, this can swing the game very quickly, so you need to be careful if you're in a green deck playing against it. Crushed Contraband is a 4-mana instant. You choose one or both. You exile artifact or exile an enchantment. You can do both of them. I give this card an F. It might be something you board in if your opponent's got multiple targets. But outside of white, there's not a lot of enchantments, and I don't really see many artifacts I care much about killing. So it's not a card I really want to bring in for 4 mana. Demotion is a really efficient removal spell for 1 white if you're the aggressive list. Enchanted creature can't block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. So this will not stop them from attacking you, but it's really efficient if you're the aggressive list to make it where they lose a blocker. Now they can either attack with it or let it sit there if they don't have good attacks, but they can't block you. So I think for 1 mana, this is really efficient playing multiple spells a turn. I give it a C+, just because if you are behind, you aren't able to shut down the creature, but I think it's great. Gird for Battle is a 1 white sorcery. You put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. This is a C- for me. I'm not really excited about 1/1 counters on a singular creature or 1/1 counter on 2 creatures, but it is pretty important for your mentor mechanic that once you start to get capped out on your mentor effects, this will allow you to start that chain again for at least a couple extra turns. Hazada Marshal is a 1 white human soldier for a 1/1. When it and at least 2 other creatures attack, you create a 1/1 white soldier creature token with lifelink. So you attack with this 1/1 and 2 others, and you get a 1/1 with lifelink. I give this card an F. I have no interest in playing this card in my deck. Maybe if I'm in Silesian, I really want that Convoke ability, but the problem is they die to all the Grizzly Bears, and running as many Grizzly Bears as possible is a fairly common limited trait. So I'm not really interested in playing this card. Inspiring Unicorn, however, is a very strong card. 4 mana for a 2/2. When it attacks, creatures you control get +1/+1 until the end of turn. I give this a B because if you're running this in the Mentor list with your Boros, you get to attack, give the other creatures +1/+1. This gets a 1/1 counter if you have somebody who already had a larger power. And now your Inspiring Unicorn can be a 3/3. It's important to remember that Inspiring Unicorn's ability won't resolve before you have to target with your Mentors. So you won't be able to make a creature bigger just to Mentor. Rock Charger is a 3 mana 1/3. When it attacks, target attacking creature without flying gains flying until the end of turn. I think this card's going to be really, again, important with your Mentor mechanic. Really, if you're trying to make that mechanic work, being able to have your Mentor creatures fly over top, especially fly with this creature to Mentor onto this creature, can cause a really quick clock for some of the green decks that don't have a lot of air-based support. I give this card a B- because I think it's going to be really important for your ground-based, large power, low toughness Mentor creatures to really make their impact. Color the Culprit is a 4 mana instant. Destroy target creature with toughness 4 or greater. So this is going to be used to blow up a lot of the green-based creatures and a lot of the other guilds. Boros doesn't have a whole lot of targets within its own guild for this, but I think it's a pretty decent removal spell. It's going to get a C- just because it does cost a fair amount of mana and has a pretty big restriction. But in limited, a lot of the cards you really want to blow up are the ones that are costing more mana, have more toughness, because those are the ones that are swinging the games. Healer's Hawk, a 1 white, 1/1 flying lifelink. I gave this card a D. I know some people are really high on the idea of mentoring this card and making it a Bill Jones Baneslayer Angel or similar effect. I personally just don't see it coming together a whole lot. I don't want to run a 1-drop 1/1 because it's so bad in the later stages of the game. And unless I'm attacking with Mentors, this one doesn't really do enough for me to be excited about. It needs a lot of help to make it work. Intrusive Pack Beast is a 5 mana 3/3. It has Vigilance, and when it enters the battlefield, you tap up to 2 target creatures your opponents control. I think this card's a C. It's really effective if you're trying to tap down 1 or 2 blockers they kept back to stop your Mentors, and then start the Mentors a little bit more. So I think it's a decent body. It's not incredibly impressive. Vigilance is decent. The 3/3 for 5 isn't very great, but the ability to tap 2 creatures will help you push through. Luminous Bonds, we've seen this one before. Just a 3 mana aura enchantment. Enchanted creature can't attack or block. There is a decent amount of enchantment and artifact hate, but I still think this card's a solid B. It's really efficient at what you're trying to accomplish. Righteous Blow is a 1 white instant. Righteous Blow deals 2 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. It's very situational. It doesn't deal a lot of damage. It works well with a first striker if they go to block, but I still think this card is a C-. It's too constrained for it to really be something I'm impressed with. Skyline Scout's a 2 mana 2/1 human scout. It has the ability to pay 1 and a white when it attacks to give it flying. So I think this card is a C+, just because it's a grizzly bear that over time will start to get over in the air. So against certain matchups, this card's not great if they have a lot of flyers, but against most decks, a 2/1 flyer repeatedly will close the game fairly quick, especially if you can mentor it once or twice. Take Heart is a 1 white instant. Target creature gets +2/+2 until the end of turn, and you gain 1 life for each attacking creature you control. I think this card's a little awkward. 1 mana for +2/+2, as we talked about earlier in another card, is pretty decent, pretty standard. But the fact that it's going to gain life for each attacking creature means that I really want to play this after I've declared my attackers. So I can't necessarily use this as a way to pump a creature before it mentors. So that kind of clashes. I sometimes are going to want to make my mentor creature bigger in combat, so that whenever it attacks, it can actually give out a counter. But then I won't gain the 1 life. So it's going to be a situational decision. Because of that drawback, I give it a C, but I still think it's pretty strong, and it's a card you're going to play in your deck. Goblin Crater Maker. I think this card is an interesting design. It's a way to interact with colorless non-land permanents or other creatures. It's a 2 mana 2/2, so it's a grizzly bear, but has the upside of paying 1 and sacrificing itself to deal 2 damage to target creature or destroy colorless non-land permanents. So you can destroy, there's only a couple artifacts, but some of them are a little bit pesky, so you can blow one of those up. But it also allows it to forcibly trade for another grizzly bear or blow up something with a higher power, lower toughness, similar to a lot of the Boros cards we've seen. I give this card a C+, just because the effect means that you're normally going to get something out of it, and at the end of the day, you're still just playing a 2-drop 2/2, which is something you want to be doing in Limited anyway. Hellkite Whelp is a 5-mana 3/3 flying dragon. When it attacks, it deals 1 damage to target creature defending player controls. Against some decks, that 1 damage is going to be a lot. Against other decks, it's not going to do anything. 5 mana for a 3/3 flyer isn't very impressive. I give this a C because there's certain decks in the format where that effect is really important, and there's certain decks in the format it's not very good. So you might board it out, but I think you want it in your opener. Street Riot is a 5-mana enchantment. As long as it's your turn, creatures you control get +1/+0 and have trample. I personally don't think that +1/+0 and trample is worth it enough, even though it's non-stop, to warrant me playing a 5-mana enchantment that might not have any impact in the game. So I give this card an F. It's not a card I'm interested in playing, but I think it's one where they're testing the effect of having this constant power and trample bonus for future card design. Fearless Halberd is a 3-mana 3/2 human warrior. Has no text. It trades with Grizzly Bears. It doesn't have any mentor. I don't think the card's phenomenal. It's a C-. You'll run it, but you'd much rather run the 3-drop 3/3 with mentor if you're given the opportunity. It's going to be here mostly to fix its curve. Goblin Locksmith is a 2-mana 2/1, so that means it dies to any 1/1, but it doesn't allow creatures with Defender to block this turn after it attacks. So every turn you attack, it can't block with Defenders. I think that's a decent effect. There are a decent number of Defenders, but I don't see a lot of Defenders that I want to play. For that reason, I give it a D, but there's certain matchups if your opponent's playing a lot of Defenders and trying to play a slow game towards a bomb, you might bring this in just so they can't use that as a way to slow the game down. Maniacal Rage is a 2-mana aura. It is enchanted creature, gets +2/+2, and can't block. I give this a D. There's a decent amount of pretty decent removal in the format. The removal is fairly strong. That I want to see more effects besides just +2/+2. You can use it for a turn to boost your mentor effects. So if you're really needing another card, you can put it in there. But I'd much rather run just another creature or another spell. Ornery Goblin is a 2-mana 2/1. At first, I wasn't excited about this till I really thought it out. When it blocks or becomes blocked by a creature, it deals 1 damage to that creature. So I give it a C, because if it gets blocked by a 1/1, this will deal 1 damage before regular damage, so it'll survive because it'll kill the 1/1. This can also trade with a 3 toughness creature, and if their opponent has any way to make a bunch of 1/1s, this allows you to start blocking and pinging those off or attack, and if it gets blocked by multiple, it pings all of them. So I think this card is really efficient, and I think it's one that you're going to want to see against a lot of the Selesnya decks. Rubble Belt Boar is a 4-mana, it's a hill giant, it's a 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, target creature gets +2/+0 until the end of turn. I think the card is a C, maybe even a C-. The extra power is decent, especially if you have a flyer with mentor, or a mentor creature you're trying to get one more trigger out of. And 4 mana for a 3/3 is acceptable, but it's not something you're really excited to play. Torch Courier is a 1 red 1/1 haste goblin that you can sacrifice to give another creature haste. I personally have not found myself to be a big fan of cards that give temporary haste, so I don't really think that the text on this card is something that makes me want to play it in Limited, especially because they're so often a board stall. So I give this card a D. Well, that's going to be it for the Boros. Make sure to give us a subscription on YouTube or to follow us on Twitter or Facebook to get notice of any of the sets and videos we release. We're going to do a different set review for every guild. So our next set review is going to be over Selesnya. And we're going to work our way all the way through Dimir. And we're going to close out with artifacts, lands, and a look at the overall set review for what you should be playing at your pre-release, what guild you should choose, and what removal you see in different lists. Thanks for tagging along, and make sure to let us know in the comments below if there's cards that you think I gave too high or too low of a rating on. Is there something that you think makes Boros a strong contender, or are you worried about whether or not Boros is going to have much of an impact in the Limited format?
If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. It helps out a lot. Also, don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with all of our uploads. You can follow us on these platforms here at MTG Deck. And finally, a big shout out to Terry Ledford for his generous Patreon donation. If you would like to become a patron for MTG Deck, please click the link down below. It is not necessary, but it helps us out quite a bit. Thank you for watching the video, and we will see you all again soon.